Dearly beloved, we're gathered here today to talk about the movies. I am Skye. Welcome to episode 12 of the movie proposal. With me, as always, is Josh Lindsay.
Hello.
And Jason Rugg to my right, who is fearlessly tapping away, getting our information and data and various things in check when we need them. And he's also monitoring our sound and makes the whole thing possible. If you're new to the podcast, I kind of get tired of saying this, but I guess, do I need to?
Maybe one more time.
One more time. We're on episode 12. That's
get with the program.
Right, come on. We do this based on a matrimony theme, which doesn't mean we're into anything,
Just something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue.
So, as always, we're going to begin with something old from the past.
Yep.
We've never really quantified what qualifies as old.
And we've been challenged on that before, too.
Yeah, some people want us to go way back.
Right.
I consider old, at this point, probably before 2000.
I'll go with that.
Like 20th century movie.
Yeah.
Right? Is that okay?
I'm down with that.
Okay, so Josh, what's your something old this week?
Okay, I'm going back to 1986.
So am I.
No. Is it The Mission?
No!
Oh! Okay.
No. My film is from 86.
Wow. Okay. Well, so the something new reminded me of The Mission, which is something I saw as a kid and had really stuck with me. Let's see here. Robert De Niro, Jeremy Irons, 18th century Jesuit priest trying to protect.
Wasn't that your something old like a couple weeks ago?
No, was it?
Yeah, we talked about it.
Oh.
I don't remember that.
I talked about it on the
Skye's.
Phil Vischer podcast.
Did you? Okay.
But he may not have talked about it on our podcast.
Okay. I just want to double check.
All right.
Yeah, keep us honest.
Oh man. Now we're doing so many now that we got to like cross-reference and make sure we're not duplicating it. All right. Well,
Jeremy Irons, Robert De Niro,
Jesuit priests, 18th century. They're trying to protect some Indian tribes in South America from Portugal, who is pro-slavery.
Okay.
And Jeremy Irons is the peaceful priest, and he's teaching Robert De Niro, who kind of lives by the sword, so to speak, but he's trying to learn the way of Jesuit priests. And anyway, it's a beautiful film. It's famous for the musical piece Gabriel's Oboe.
Can't say I know it.
Okay. Well, if you just Google Gabriel's Oboe, it is a beautiful musical piece, and it's an oboe.
Okay.
All right. But it's famous for that, and it tackles some great and heavy themes, related to Christianity and so forth. But I love it. If you haven't seen it, you should go check. Have you seen it?
It was a long time ago.
Oh.
I need to probably
You need to go see it again.
Yeah, I do.
That's my goal.
I'm not going to go see it again.
All right, rent it or
I'll have it see me.
download it.
Yeah.
Have it come to you.
Right. Okay, my something old, also from 1986, slightly different than The Mission, although it is about a mission, is Stand By Me.
Oh, yeah.
So the movie was directed. I didn't realize this until I went back and researched it. It was Rob Reiner directed Meathead. He directed it. It's hard to believe that, but it was based on a Stephen King short story called The Body, and it's about four boys who are friends. This is like in the 1950s, and they find the rumor is that there's another kid in this small town who's disappeared, and rumor has it that he was hit by a train, and his body is somewhere off in the forest off by the train tracks. So these four boys decide we're going to go and find it. And it sounds really grim and dark, but it's actually a really funny, interesting. It's got, like many Stephen King stories, there's multiple layers to it. But the boys, it's sort of this coming of age story. And the whole thing is narrated by Richard Dreyfuss, who's an adult thinking back to this event that happened when he was 13 years old, with his three best friends, and they go looking for this body. And it's charming and funny and deep and reflective all at the same time. It's got River Phoenix in it, Will Wheaton when he was really young, Jerry O'Connell, Corey Feldman, Kiefer Sutherland.
He's great in that.
Yeah, it's just such a great movie. And I hadn't thought about it in a long time, but I'm thinking my kids are at an age where they're probably old enough to watch. It's a rated R movie.
It is R, the language, for sure.
There's definitely language in it, but it's just so... They don't make movies like that anymore.
They don't. My favorite line, or one of my favorite lines, is when the lead actor's got a gun on the bullies who have come to also claim the body.
Yeah.
And Kiefer Sutherland says, "What are you going to do? Shoot us all?" And he says, "No, Snake. I'm just going to shoot you." It was like such a ballsy moment.
Yeah.
You're like, as a kid, you're like, yeah, I want to be like that, right?
And it's such a. There's so many layers to it because at the beginning of the story, you find out that Will Wheaton's character, who's narrating it as an adult, had an older brother who recently died.
Who was played by?
Oh, who was he played by?
Gosh, he's on the tip of my tongue. What's the movie holding up the?
Oh, yeah.
John Cusack?
John
Oh,
Cusack.
gosh,
Yeah.
John Cusack. Thank you.
So there's these layers of things going on, and it's a profound movie. It's not just four boys kind of frolicking out in the woods doing stupid stuff. It's really deep and thoughtful and intense and funny and beautifully written. I love that movie. So if you haven't seen Stand By Me,
I want to go back and see it again.
yeah. So those are our two something old recommendations. Okay, something new. This is like the meatiest, chunkiest, fullest part of the podcast episode. We take a new movie that we both recently seen and give our reflections on it. This week we are talking about a movie I've been waiting a long time for, Silence, directed by Martin Scorsese, starring
Adam Driver.
Adam Driver, who is the strangest looking human being on the planet. And
He is strange in this movie, but I don't. When he's got weight, when he's normal
he's a
weight.
weird looking dude.
Well,
I mean, he gives me hope. He gives me hope that you don't have to be like an Adonis, like this perfect human specimen to be a really good actor.
what are you hoping for?
I don't know. It's
At
like
this point in your life,
not that I have any hope to be an acting or something, but he's just he's a really, you gotta admit, when you see him in this movie,
in the movie for sure,
he does not,
he lost 50 pounds, and he's a skinny guy to begin with.
I know, but and if you don't know who Adam Driver is, he's also Kylo Ren in the
Force Awakens.
in the Force Awakens, new Star Wars movies. But he doesn't even look human. Like he in this movie, he looks like a CGI character that is some mix of human DNA and some alien thing. He's just a weird looking. He looks like a shaved chihuahua. Of some kind. I don't know. It's a strange thing. But and Adam Garfield. Is that his name? Andrew Garfield.
Andrew Garfield.
Right.
Spider-Man, The Amazing Spider-Man.
The Amazing Spider-Man.
Hacksaw Ridge.
Right. He's been making interesting movies this year.
has.
So give us the rundown. You usually.
A shaved chihuahua doesn't look that different from a normal chihuahua.
That's true. Well. I'm not thinking about shaved chihuahua. They have those ugliest dog of the year competitions.
Oh man.
I think Adam Driver was in one of those.
Well, like the way he looks or not, he's doing
That's
pretty.
not no. That's a Tim Burton dog right there. No, that's not him either. That's mess. Anyway, give us the synopsis, Josh.
Okay,
of the movie.
18th century Japan. Two Jesuit priests from Portugal travel to Japan in an attempt to locate their lost mentor.
Okay, that's kind of the
Yes.
really basic line of story. So it's based on a novel written by Sasuke Endo back in the 1960s. Martin Scorsese, who directed and made the film, has wanted to make this movie for 30 years. He's been trying to get it made or had thoughts of getting it made. So finally, it's out there now. What is your proposal for Silence?
Well, first I want to say, when we discussed this, you said I need to read the book, which I did, and I'm glad I did. So I'd recommend anyone to read the book as well. The other thing I want to say, mentioned Martin Scorsese. I was reading that when he made The Last Temptation of Christ, and there was this big to-do about boycotting the film,
Right.
and Christian organizations were trying to buy the film so they could destroy it
Yeah.
and so forth. The night it opened, or that weekend, I should say, the premiere, Martin Scorsese was given the book, Silence.
Really? Is that when?
Yeah, one of the producers or executives at the film company said, "Hey, you need to read this book," and he's read that book many times.
And he's a committed Roman Catholic.
Yeah, well, he describes himself a quote lapsed Catholic. He can never get rid of it, but I do get the impression that he is committed.
Well, he actually took this movie to screen at the Vatican.
Yes,
And yeah, and Sasuke Endo, who wrote the novel, is a Japanese Roman Catholic.
yeah.
Which that's pretty rare. There are not a lot of Japanese Christians in Japan. It's I think less than 1%.
Oh.
And Roman Catholic, so he's a very rare bird. So what's your proposal?
All right. And I'm glad I'm talking to you about this film because this was heavy duty. So I propose that the powerful and yet exhausting film Silence, while it paints a beautiful and unique cinematic picture of Jesus, it asks more questions than gives answers.
Okay. I'm going to have a much shorter
All right.
proposal. I propose that Silence is the best Christian movie. Period.
Wow.
Period. And now that's saying a lot, but I have to also qualify that the book, the novel Silence, is one of my all-time favorite books. Mm-hmm. So I've read it multiple times. I know the story very well. I was grateful to see that the movie is very, very faithful to the book.
It is.
It doesn't quite get every nuance of the book that I wanted it to, but no movie ever does. So I don't really hold that against it. But I agree with your proposal. I'd say it, just like the novel, it does raise more questions than it answers.
Well, when I read the novel, I think it needs multiple readings, mm-hmm. but I only read it once. I was looking forward to the movie because I was anticipating just the questions about, because Andrew Garfield he's a Jesuit priest. He's looking for his mentor who has apparently apostatized. He's renounced God, which is a huge deal because this is like Billy Graham saying he doesn't believe in Jesus anymore, right? And this is, they can't email him or give him a call, so they have to make this dangerous trek to a dangerous country where they're basically, if they get caught, they're dead or tortured. Or,
right. So a little historical background. Although the novel is fictional, it's based on a historical time period in Japan when the Japanese rulers were very bothered by the European influence that's coming into the country. So they basically bar any Europeans from entering Japan. This is during the Shogun era and all that. And although there are hundreds of thousands of Japanese who had already converted to Christianity, they started systematically persecuting those Japanese believers and trying to cleanse the country of Christianity. So there are what were called hidden Christians. They were underground Christians who, on the surface of things, they continued to be Buddhists or Shintoists or whatever, but underneath the surface, they were actually maintaining their Christian faith. And in the story, these two Jesuit priests, who are played by Adam Driver and Andrew Garfield, sneak back into the country to find their lost mentor and find out whether or not he really did apostatize. And then they end up kind of ministering to these underground hidden Christians.
Who are desperate.
Yeah, and they're being killed pretty brutally for their faith. And eventually, the priests also get captured by the rulers, and it precipitates all kinds of questions about when is it okay? Is it ever okay to deny your faith? And the name of the book, the name of the movie, Silence, is rooted in the question, when these horrible injustices are happening and people are suffering terribly and being persecuted for the name of Christ, why is God silent? Where is he in the midst of the horrible things that happen in this world? And I can't, there is not a Christian alive who's been a Christian for any length of time who doesn't wonder that question,
right?
Either because of experiences in their own life or because of what they see happening in the world. So that's why, for me, this is one of the most profound, excuse me for spitting, Christian movies you can make, because it deals with the core questions of life and faith, and it does it in a serious way without being cliche. And again, I hate to rip on a lot of popular Christian movies, but so many of them either avoid these kinds of questions or they give really cliche answers to them. And I feel like Silence, both as a book and a movie, doesn't do that. It respects the audience and the reality of suffering in this world in a way that I think is profound.
I was reading some reviews, and one of my favorite comments in a review was, this is not the sort of film you like or don't like. It's a film that you experience and then live with. And I really feel that way because, the reason I picked the mission as my something old is because, besides the facts about Jesuit priests and mission work and that sort of thing, the mission is very cinematic. And it really is famous for its music. Mm-hmm. There is no music in Silence. Like, there's no cues. Okay, now it's time to feel this way. Or now the main character is feeling anguish. Like, it's being presented to you, and you really like. I really felt like this was work.
It is.
Seeing this film.
And it's a long movie.
It is a very long movie, which is why I said it was exhausting. I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. But it does bring up a lot of questions that some of them seemingly get answered and some of them don't. And I didn't know, don't know if you can discuss some of these or
Yeah.
like the whole thing about. Let's start with the one where
And there may be spoilers here, people. So
definitely spoilers. Yeah. So the Christians who are, I'm sorry, not the Christians, the Japanese who are seemingly, quote, the bad guys in this film, the ones that are torturing people. First of all, they're super nice to the Jesuits, relatively speaking. We're like, look, just step on this. Is it a fume?
Yeah. So there's these plaques which have religious icons on them. Usually it's one of Jesus. And the way you would renounce your faith is simply placing your foot onto this image as a way of denouncing your faith in Christ.
Right. So they want him to step on this fume, and they're saying things like, look, it's just a formality. All you got to do it, just step on it, no big deal. All suffering ends. And I was confused because I'm like, is this a psychological game? Why is it such a big deal that they must step on it? But they're even telling them it's not a big deal.
Yeah. Well, one thing you got to know is some history here. And you see this even in the New Testament, the book of Acts, for example, when there are riots in Athens because Paul comes to preach the gospel and the silversmiths all get together and they're flipping out because they realize, oh my goodness, if this message gets acceptance, people are going to stop buying the silver idols of Artemis that we've been creating. We're going to lose money.
Oh.
Right? So at the end of the day, most of the time, persecution of any religious tradition, but especially of Christianity, it's not because people believe things that we don't like. It's because the implications of those beliefs have cultural or economic or political ramifications. They don't really care what you think. They don't care what's in your heart. They don't care what internally is going on. What they care about is the stability of society. So believe whatever you want. We don't care. We just need to be able to publicly say that Christianity is not allowed here. So just go through the formality. Say Hail Caesar or Caesar is Lord, whatever. Go on believing whatever you want, but we need you to just toe the party line and go along with the practice. Like you still buy the silver idols. So, almost broke our desk. This idea that Christians are persecuted for what they believe isn't usually the case. They're persecuted because the implications of their belief have some consequence in society or economic or political consequence that the ruling authorities don't like. Does that make sense?
It does. So because that exists, then these missionaries show up and they're trying to evangelize. And the Japanese are like, whoa, we can't have this for our culture. It's so bad. We're willing to torture and kill people to do this. And they take it to the extreme of not only, because they take it up a notch where this is where it gets to the crux of the film. It's not about you apostatizing and we'll stop torturing you. It's we're going to torture these people over here. They've already apostatized, but we're going to keep torturing them. You, Mr. Missionary, we're only going to stop torturing these people if you apostatize.
Right. And it's brilliant when you think about it because they treat Andrew Garfield's character, Rodrigo, they treat him really well.
Right.
They feed him well. They clothe him well. They are respectful to him. He's living fairly comfortably. But all these other Christians are being tortured because of him.
Right.
Until he renounces his faith. And so the dilemma he faces is he's very willing to die for his faith. He's willing to experience torture for his faith. But how willing are you to cause other people to suffer for your faith? And what I think wasn't super clear in the movie, but was much more explicit in the book, was the dilemma was not, it wasn't just, am I willing to let people suffer for my faith? It's, Rodrigo came into Japan with a sense of self-righteousness, that I am absolutely devoted to Christ. I will sacrifice anything for Christ. I am not going to apostatize the way other priests have done. I am even willing to be martyred for my faith. And there's a sense of strength and confidence and righteousness before God. And there's this other character, this Japanese Christian who's kind of a Judas character, who he just looks down upon and despises because he has no strength.
He's weak.
He's weak. And Rodrigo's like, I'm not like that. Right. I am going to, it's very much Peter saying, everyone else may renounce you, Jesus, but I never will.
Yeah.
There's a self-righteousness. So what's really at stake here is your love so great for the people that you say you're here to serve that you would sacrifice your own reputation and your own sense of self-righteousness for their sake? That's what's being asked of him.
So, more spoilers.
Yeah.
He eventually meets his mentor, who is played by Liam Neeson, and he is there to convince Andrew Garfield's character to apostatize. And there's much debate, arguments that are made.
Because he already had years earlier.
Yes, and so, and I have a question whether he really bought into it or not. It was unclear to me, but he gave in. And when Andrew Garfield steps on, or he's about to step on the fume.
Yeah, the image of Jesus.
Jesus in the movie speaks to him.
And in the book.
Well, yes. And in the book, I thought it was Andrew Garfield's character thinking it himself. I went back to reread it, but in the movie, it was clear. It was not Andrew Garfield. This is a different voice.
Right.
And that was a very moving part of the movie. And that's where I felt they created a quote, image of Christ that was unique and beautiful, because it was like the way it was communicated, like, I'm here to take your pain. And quite often, the pain we describe is usually a physical pain or a loss of a loved one or hopelessness or whatever. We're here. Can you walk our audience and me through?
So here's what's beautiful about the book. During the whole book or the whole movie, Rodrigo is asking, why are you silent, God? Why aren't you speaking to me? Why aren't you speaking to your people? Why aren't you delivering them from this horrible persecution that's happening? Why are you silent? Why are you silent? Hence the title. And you finally get to this moment, this climax of the story where he has to decide whether or not to renounce Jesus. And you finally hear God speak, right?
Yeah,
finally, Jesus speaks. But what does he say? He says, trample me, right? Step on me. And in the book, I can't remember if it's in the movie, he says, this is why I've come into the world.
I think he does.
And then he says, all the time you've been wondering, where have I been? And he said, I have been with you this whole time. And what's remarkable about that moment is when you think back to Jesus' own crucifixion, and we lose some of this in our culture, but if you, in Jewish culture at that time, drawing from an Old Testament passage, it says anyone who is hung on a tree is cursed by God. So the Jews took that to mean if you're crucified on a cross, which is sort of a tree, not only are you being killed by the Roman Empire, but it's a sign that you are being utterly and completely rejected by God. So when Jesus willingly takes his cross, what he's doing is he's not merely dying for all of our sins, which he was, although the people at the time didn't realize it. He was sacrificing his reputation. All these thousands of people in Jerusalem who a week earlier were hailing him as the heir of David and the coming Messiah and the ruling king, what everyone saw when they looked up at Jesus on that cross was not just, oh, look, that's terrible, the Romans are killing him. What they saw was God himself is rejecting Jesus. He is a sinner and he's a terrible person, because that only happens to a terrible person who's hated by God.
Yeah.
So Jesus was willing to endure the shame of the cross. That's what Hebrews tells us. In other words, the humiliation of everyone thinking that you are the worst person in the world, because his love for us was so great. So when Rodrigo has to make the decision of, am I willing to sacrifice my own sense of identity, my own sense of value and significance, my own religious convictions in order to save these people's lives, he's actually acting exactly like Jesus.
Got it.
So when Jesus says, you must trample me because this is why I came into the world, in other words, he's saying, are you really willing to lose your life for me? Because if you really want to be like Jesus, you need to be willing to do this. And okay, contemporary application, and this is where I think we need to wrestle with it as Americans, because we're obviously not facing a persecution like the Shogun era in 17th century Japan. You see a lot of Christians today in the media, in churches, whatever, universities, who get very angry and very defensive in defending Christianity, in defending Jesus, in defending Christian values, in defending Scripture, whatever. And the question we need to ask ourselves is, does that anger and that energy, is that really coming from a desire to defend God or defend Jesus, or are we really defending ourselves? Are we trying to defend our own reputation, our own dignity, our own sense of value and worth in the culture? And what you get from this book and from this movie is maybe God doesn't need to be defended by us. Mm-hmm. And what we need to come to terms with is we're actually out to defend ourselves. And we're not willing to be humiliated.
Yeah. And I thought I'm glad you brought that up, like the practical application, because I was trying to think, when would I ever encounter a scenario where I would need to renounce God in some form or fashion, maybe not quite blatantly as stepping on the fumé or something like that, but in order to serve, protect, save someone else. Mm-hmm. And certainly I can see where you're, with Rodriguez, it was about sacrificing his reputation and, I'm good enough to do all this. I'm just wondering, can you think of an example where us renouncing God, so to speak, is beneficial to others?
I don't think it's about renouncing God. I think it's more of a matter of, am I willing to be seen as a fool, not just by non-Christians, but by the church, in order to do what Jesus would do. So what we've done in the American church is we have held up, and we're going to talk about this on the, or maybe when this podcast comes out, it'll be after the next Phil Vischer podcast. There's a new book out by two friends of mine called The Way of the Dragon and The Way of the Lamb, by Jamin Goggin and Kyle Strobel, and they interviewed Christian leaders around the world, actually. And what that book examines is how in the American church we have held up an ideal of leadership which values strength and power and influence and authority and all these very American ideals of leadership, which in fact are the antithesis of what Jesus did. He was weak and humble and sacrificed his reputation on that. So I don't think it's about, are we willing to renounce God in order to protect someone else? It's, are we willing to follow in the footsteps of Jesus and sacrifice our sense of power and authority and significance in order to live the way Jesus lived? And that's, frankly, really missing in the American church today. What we tend to celebrate is the guy who stuck it to the man, right? Yeah. Who fought and challenged as the Christian soldier and the culture warrior. And what this book and movie are saying is, actually, what would it look like if we didn't pursue the route of power, but we actually surrendered it in order to love and serve and give, and maybe be laughed at and mocked by the world the way Jesus was? Would that unleash more of the power of his kingdom?
Problem is, it's so nuanced.
It is, yeah. That's
just
exactly.
Give me a top 10 list.
Well, and that's exactly it, though. That's why I say this is the best Christian movie, because it's not cut and dry. It's not a cliche. It doesn't fit on a coffee mug. It's not evangelical, to be crass. This is not evangelical theology. This is biblical theology, and it's complicated and it's nuanced, and it's not, hey, I'm just going to pray every day, and at the end of the movie, everything's going to turn out just fine. Right. And that's why you're not seeing churches line up to buy out theaters to go see this movie.
Right.
Because it's frankly too much like Jesus.
Which ironically, like in my proposal, I said, it creates a unique picture of Jesus. And I was so moved. It was a moment of where I got a lot of what Jesus was saying, and I had questions about what was going on. I was intrigued that a guy who made The Departed and Goodfellas, Martin Scorsese, who just like made this, and like had Jesus in the film speaking. And then at the very end, another spoiler, when Rodriguez lives for a long time, when he eventually does die, in his coffin, he's holding in his hand a tiny cross, which is not in the book, right?
I don't think so, yeah.
Which indicates his life in Japan when he was supposed to have renounced Christianity and lived a life without God and Christ. In fact, he was used to help keep Christian things out of the country. He secretly held on to his faith, which was intriguing. Mm-hmm. And then at the very end of the movie, when the movie was ending, it went to black, and it said this film was dedicated to Japanese Christians.
And then their pastors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I thought, what? Once again, Goodfellas, the same guy who made Goodfellas, made this movie. I'm like, so I was curious, like, what was your takeaway from that?
Well, I was surprised by that final dedication for a couple of reasons. Number one, there are very few Japanese Christians in Japan to this day, and there are very few pastors. I mean, more than in the 1700s when the movie was set. And I'm curious to know how the Japanese are going to react to that, because even to this day, it's a very closed society. For example, in Japan, you cannot legally immigrate to Japan if you are a Muslim.
Oh, really?
They will not allow you to become a resident of Japan because they see Islam as so antithetical to Japanese culture that they don't want that influence there. And that's part of the reason why Christianity still remains such a tiny fraction of the population, because the attitude of accepting outside influence is just not okay. They're not like American society in that regard. So for him to dedicate this movie to Japanese Christians and their pastors, it's like, wow. There's some ambiguity in the film and in the book about, is Martin Scorsese saying that missionaries really shouldn't impose their beliefs on an outside culture?
Which is an unanswered question that I had.
Right.
Yep.
That's a question that arises in the middle of the movie, and legitimate question, and you don't know where he stands on that. But then at the end, when you see that dedication, you're like, dang. Like, he's answered it. Yeah. He's answered it. He's saying, you Japanese Christians and those faithful pastors, you go, guys, girls, whoever. It's a profound moment of he's putting down his flag and saying, yeah, this is good. This is right. So I was shocked by that as well. But what was the other question that you wanted to?
I don't know. He was holding the cross in his coffin.
Yeah. And his wife, he ends up marrying, which obviously a Jesuit priest normally wouldn't marry. So after he renounces his faith, he takes a wife and has a family and lives a long life in Japan. And it's clear that they were essentially hidden Christians at that point.
Yeah.
They were living like normal Japanese, but beneath the surface, they remained dedicated to Christ.
Right. In the book, it ends with him saying basically that he acknowledges that God was never silent. He was with him the whole time. And that's basically the end of the book. In the movie, the end of the movie is his coffin holding the cross, which to me was an indication that he never let go of his faith.
Right. Yeah, and it's exactly what I think will disturb some people about this movie is exactly what I liked about it. It is the ambiguities. It is the messiness of it. But I think that's more honest. So I just think this is a movie you should definitely see. It's a movie you need to discuss. It's a movie you need to wrestle with. Even better, read the book. You'll get more texture and nuance in a book always over a movie, but it is a beautifully made movie as well. And it's not entertaining.
No.
It's challenging. It's difficult. And some of the violence is
difficult
to watch, but it's supposed to be, obviously.
Right.
Anyway.
But I loved it. I thought it was great.
Yeah, I was thrilled with how I was very worried when I heard he was making it into a movie because I thought, oh no, is Scorsese just going to Goodfellas it? And just make
Which is a great film, though.
Which is a great, but I was worried he was interested in it because of the violence.
Right.
Not because of the spiritual themes in it, but it's very clear that he was faithful to the book. I appreciate it.
I will say, if I go see another movie between La La Land and Silence, I'd probably run go see La La Land again. Because it is more entertaining.
Okay, well, that brings up an interesting juxtaposition, which I was texting with you about.
Yes, I'd like to hear
because we talked about La La Land last time, and we saw how in La La Land, a person's individual dream trumped their love for another person, right? The relationship was sacrificed in favor of, I'm going to reach my dream. And what you see in Silence is the exact inverse.
Right.
Where his dream of being a heroic, martyred missionary, he surrenders that in order to love his Japanese Christian sisters and brothers. And for me, that's a much more Christ-like response, that I will sacrifice my dream for others. Whereas La La Land was, to hell with everyone else, I'm going to get my dream.
That's right.
So those two movies could not be more juxtaposed or inverse of one another. The world's values, America's values versus the Christian values. It's just great to see.
And what's interesting is the box office is La La Land's killing it in the box office, and Silence is really struggling.
Yeah, it'll never be a big money maker. Yeah. So, okay, something borrowed.
So Andrew Garfield was on the Stephen Colbert Show, which is
Late Night.
It's called Late Night,
isn't it?
Late Night with Stephen Colbert.
Yeah.
Late Night, yeah. Which it wasn't a lot of jokes and laughter. It was about Andrew Garfield's experience of, I think, was it a year or a significant amount of time where he was with a Jesuit priest and went through the motions of learning, how you think and live as a Jesuit priest.
Right. And he went through the Ignatian practices, which, anyway, I've written about this elsewhere, but Ignatius Loyola was the founder of the Jesuits, and he had this. He basically invented what evangelicals now call the quiet time, although he did it in a far more depth, which was using Scripture for self-reflection and to commune deeply with Jesus. And so Adam Driver and Andrew Garfield both went through the Ignatian exercises.
Is that the 7-day silent thing?
Right. They went through the silent period of going through the exercises. And what Andrew Garfield had to say about the experience was really fascinating.
Well, well, one of the things is he seemed to really fall in love with Jesus, like as an incredible person. And the more he talked, the more you're like, are you a Christian now? And then Stephen Colbert started really digging into it.
Because he's a very committed Roman Catholic.
Right. And it brought up the whole, he started using other words, where it's like, the idea of God and so forth is, could mean a lot of different things.
Yeah, it's very clear it's wishy-washy.
Yes.
He's certainly not in the realm of what we consider historic Orthodox.
Right.
But
at the end, they do get into he asks them quite, point blank, some question about, do you believe in God or something? And that's when he goes on the kind of a rant on certainty.
Yeah.
He doesn't like the idea of certainty. That's what leads to wars and things like that, and the audience applause and then they go to commercial. But
yeah.
I thought it was a fascinating interview.
Well, if anyone watches the movie or is intrigued by these Ignatian practices, I've written about it in different places, but there's a lot that is very biblical about it. Andrew Garfield in that clip talks about how the Ignatian practices, you imaginatively put yourself into scenes with Jesus in his life. And people go, oh, that's kind of weird and meditative and on and on. It's actually embedded in the very gospel writing itself that's what the gospel writers intended us to do.
Oh.
So a lot of people don't know this, but when you read the gospels, the verb tense has been changed for English. It's actually written in present tense. So we read in English, well, then Jesus went to Galilee and he touched this person or he preached to these people. It's actually all in present tense. It's actually Jesus goes to Galilee and Jesus speaks to these people and Jesus touches this person. And the reason for that was in ancient Greek writing, when things were written in that kind of verb tense, the intent was to trigger your imagination, to picture it in the present as happening right now so that you would insert yourself into the narrative. So that's actually, and it actually goes back before that into Hebrew literature. So the idea was you don't just read these stories as historical accounts. You're supposed to read them and imagine yourself in the story with Jesus so that you can experience his power and his teaching, all that in the present, not just as something that happened in the past. So that's exactly what Ignatius Loyola picks up on and then creates these disciplines that you go through that and then start asking, well, how would I feel if I were that woman who'd been bleeding for 12 years? Or how would I be if I was that father whose child, that kind of thing. And it transforms your vision of who God is and who you are. That's what Andrew Garfield was experiencing.
Yeah.
So it's a beautiful discipline that we don't respect enough because it comes from a tradition that may be different from ours, but I highly recommend if you're interested to look up books on it or read stuff that I've written on it. It's worth looking into.
It's fascinating.
Yeah. Okay. We're probably way over time. Lastly, we did something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue. Josh, something that blew your mind or blue chunks that you've seen recently?
Well, I've got a long list of blew my mind. I'm having a hard time picking one. I'm going to go with the recent one, Hell or High Water. The Chris Pine, Jeff Bridges bank robbery in
I have not seen it.
Midland, Texas. I don't think it was in theaters very long. I don't know why it didn't get more media publicity and that sort of thing, but solid film. I described it to my wife and she said it sounds like A Simple Plan. Do you remember that movie?
A long time ago. What was that?
Billy Bob Thornton and Chet from Weird Science. What's his name? The Big Brother Chet
from Weird Science. I can't believe that you remember that. You don't remember the actor's name. I know who you mean though.
Bill
Twister.
Paxton?
Bill Paxton.
Yeah.
He turns into a giant pile of poop.
Yeah.
Well, his career has.
Right.
Okay.
Simple Plan. It's like, life is normal and happy and fine, but then they come into some money and then they have a simple plan. Everything goes to hell.
Right.
Well, in Hell or High Water, things aren't actually that great, and they come up with a plan to help his kids out, Chris Pine's kids. And does it all work out? Well, you have to see the movie.
But it's really good. Huh?
Solid film. Okay. Great acting, great script, just a great movie.
Okay. I also have something that blew my mind instead of something that blew chunks. So it's not been too long since Donald Trump has become president officially. There's a documentary. It's not really a documentary. It's a news show that I like watching regularly called Frontline, which is developed by PBS.
Oh, yeah.
But they make really in-depth documentaries about current events, whether they're political or historical kind of stuff going on. So Frontline recently came out with a 4-hour, 2-part documentary called The Divided States of America.
Oh.
And I'll just read you the description from their website about the Divided States of America. It says, drawing on extensive new interviews with White House and congressional insiders from both parties, as well as Frontline's vast body of reporting on the Obama era, Divided States digs into the causes of America's intense polarization and questions how the next president and Congress can govern in an era of complex challenges. This television event, led by veteran Frontline filmmaker Michael Kirk and his team, tells a revealing story that's not just about Barack Obama's presidency, but about America itself. So I watched the whole thing in the last week. But I mean, it's a really, really great summation of what we've experienced over the last 2 years and how we got to where we are. Like, how did Trump become president? What are the issues that are dividing us so profoundly? How did Barack Obama, who came in under the hope and change kind of, we're going to unite. We're not red America and blue America. We're just United States of America. Like, what happened?
Yeah.
Like, how did it all go to pot? It's really fascinating. They look at all kinds of things from the healthcare law to Black Lives Matters to the polarization in Congress, the Tea Party movement, the birther movement, all kinds of different things. And it's a really, really well done. I found it to be incredibly fair in its... it gives a lot of voice to conservative leaders. It talks directly to, the John Boehners and the Eric Cantors and, on the right, and it deals with a lot of people who worked in the White House on the left. So really brilliantly done, very informative, well worth the time.
Can you watch it on the app?
Yes, you can watch it on the PBS website, or you can watch it on their app.
Okay.
It's totally free. It's PBS.
I'm checking it out.
You should check it out.
Right after I watched Die Hard.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, we've kind of run the gamut today, haven't we? We did Die Hard last time.
Oh, I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, no, this was Stand By Me we talked about.
Oh,
and The
he's
Mission.
that too.
Okay, so we threw a lot at you this time, guys. We'd love to hear your thoughts. If you've seen Silence, if you've read the book, we'd love, especially if you would give us a rating on iTunes, help us to build our audience, send this podcast to your friends, tell them they have to listen to it. Check us out on Patreon. It's the Phil Vischer Patreon page, which I don't know how you get there, but you can go to Phil Vischer's website.
Patreon.com/Phil Vischer.
There you go. Go to my website, all that kind of stuff, whatever. Josh, any final remarks or plugs?
No, I'm having fun. This has been great, Skye, so I hope we continue.
Yeah, we will. All right, give us suggestions, what you guys want us to review. We may or may not take them, but we appreciate you watching. Until next time, you can kiss this episode goodbye.
Now, he said sick 'em boy, but what I heard was Chopper sick balls.